Today, we're digging into a problem that was never supposed to last this long, the Palestinian refugee crisis. We're going to unpack how a situation that was meant to be temporary has now stretched across 75 years. And we'll uncover the surprising and really pivotal role the United States played in all of it. Let's start with a number. 5.8 million. Just let that sink in. That's how many Palestinian refugees are registered with the United Nations right now. It's a staggering figure. And to understand how we got here, you really have to go all the way back to the beginning. You see, right after the 1948 conflict, the world scrambled to put together some emergency measures. Everybody saw this as a temporary crisis that needed a temporary fix. So the big question is, how did those temporary fixes become a permanent, 75-year-old reality? Let's find out. Okay, so in the aftermath of the 1948 war, there's this huge humanitarian crisis. All eyes turned to the brand new United Nations. They had to do something, and they had to do it fast. The UN's response happened in this really rapid sequence. First, in May 48, they try for a political solution. It fails. So, Plan B. By November, they set up an emergency relief fund. Then, just a month later, they pass a really important resolution, Resolution 194, which we'll get to. All of this leads to the creation of a brand new agency in 1949, UNRW, that was supposed to be a temporary body just to provide aid. Now, that Resolution 194 is absolutely crucial. It's the foundation for the whole UN approach. It basically said refugees who wanted to go home should be permitted to do so, or if they chose not to, they should get compensation for their property. This one idea, the right of return, has been at the very heart of this entire issue ever since. And UNRWA was the agency built to actually deliver on the humanitarian side of things. Its job was really specific: run schools, provide healthcare, hand out relief. It was not a political body. And, critically, it was designed from day one to be temporary, and it ran completely on voluntary donations. And this is where the situation becomes totally unique. See, for every other refugee crisis in the world, there's the UNHCR. But Palestinian refugees have their own separate agency, UNRWA. And here's the key difference. UNRWA's definition allows refugee status to be passed down through generations. So if your parents were refugees, you're a refugee. If you're a refugee, your children will be. No other refugee group on Earth is handled this way. So while the UN is setting up this very unique system, the United States is figuring out its own approach. And honestly, America's position back in those early days might really surprise you. Yeah, get this. This is 1949. The Truman administration was not handing out blank checks. The president's people were incredibly blunt. They sent a message basically threatening to reconsider all support, including loans, if Israel didn't allow refugees to return. That is some serious pressure. And that wasn't just a one-off. A few years later, in '56, you have the Suez Crisis. When Israel, Britain, and France invade Egypt, President Eisenhower comes down on them. Hard. He threatens sanctions and forces a complete withdrawal. At this point, the U.S. clearly sees itself as a neutral broker in the region. So if the U.S. started out as this neutral, even tough broker, what changed? I mean, how did we get from threatening to cut aid to becoming Israel's most unshakable ally? Well, the answer lies in one single world-changing week in June 1967. The Six-Day War changed absolutely everything. Before the war, American policy was all about balancing interests. But after Israel's stunning victory, the entire calculation in Washington shifted. Israel wasn't just some small country anymore. It was now seen as a powerful, dependable Cold War asset against Arab nations that were backed by the Soviet Union. And this pivot wasn't just about a few foreign policy memos. It fundamentally changed America's entire relationship with the Middle East and created a completely new political reality, both in Washington and on the ground. This new alliance was really built on a few strong pillars. First, there's the strategic angle we just mentioned: Israel as a key player against Soviet influence. Second, back in the U.S., you have the rise of powerful domestic lobbying groups like AIPAC. Third, a really influential religious and political movement, Christian Zionism, emerges, and it offers pretty much unconditional support. So what's the result of all of this? America's role shifts from being a mediator to being more of a conflict manager, with Israeli security as the absolute top priority.
And to give you a sense of scale on that third pillar, 40 million. That's the estimated number of Christian Zionists in the United States. It's a massive and powerful political force. And for many, their support is tied to a belief that the modern state of Israel fulfills biblical prophecy, which often translates into rock-solid political support.
And that political support, well, it translates directly into financial and military support. Since 1949, the U.S. has provided over $100 billion in aid to Israel. That figure just dwarfs the aid we've given to entire continents. This economic reality is the bedrock of the strategic alliance. Okay, so where does all this leave the original problem, the refugees? Well, this new landscape, with this unbreakable U.S.-Israel alliance, effectively froze the refugee issue solid. All the solutions that were once on the table were now at a dead end. Let's just walk through those three paths that were imagined way back in the late 40s. First, the right of return. Well, that's blocked. Israel considers it a demographic threat and has laws against it. Okay, path 2, compensation. After 75 years, the logistics and the sheer cost of trying to figure that out are seen as impossible. And path 3, resettlement in other countries. This has been widely rejected by the refugees themselves, who hold on to that right of return as a core part of their collective identity. And that brings us to today. The temporary UN agency is a permanent fixture. The refugee population continues to grow. The political deadlock is absolute. We've seen how a short-term humanitarian problem got caught up in global politics and became a permanent crisis. With the original solutions all off the table, it leaves us with one final unavoidable question. How do you solve a 75-year-old temporary problem?